Hi, this is Elliot Haskell and welcome to another edition of Best Practices Weekly. Today we're going to be talking about writing feature articles with your students as a way to teach them nonfiction writing. And this comes from an article on The Reading Teacher in which Kent State University professor Denise Morgan talks about the fact that oftentimes in elementary school we just use research reports as a way to teach nonfiction writing, and I think we're probably all fairly familiar with the reports on animals or the reports on the US states, and while these are all well and good, Morgan talks about the fact that it doesn't necessarily get at the depth of nonfiction writing because it's very focused on just finding facts and then compiling facts and organizing facts. And it doesn't really speak to the authorial process, to thinking about when you're putting together a nonfiction piece, what do you have to think about, how you're structuring it, and also those deep understandings of the writing process. And so what she recommends is, and what she did a study on, is this idea of using the feature article. And so just so we're all on the same page, the feature article being a nonfiction piece of writing you often find in a magazine or a newspaper that really is focused on kind of half facts, half opinion. The characteristics she pulls out are that there are facts, there's story, there's strong voice, and there's opinion. All of those are components to the longer form feature article. And what she did was she took a class of 4th graders and she did a unit on teaching them how to write feature articles that was highly successful. And this article really goes through how she did that. And a couple of background things. First of all, this was done during 40-minute writers workshop blocks with this class of 4th graders. And essentially the way it worked was she collected a lot of anchor texts or mentor texts, which were from Time for Kids, from other sources of nonfiction writing for kids that were really well-written feature articles, and she used those as are the materials for the mini lessons. Which I'm going to do now is talk about what each mini lesson really entailed, each of the key ones, and then talk a little bit about how she implemented them so that you can implement them in your classroom too. So the first of the mini lessons was on analyzing the structure of feature articles. And so this took a couple of different forms. First, whole class, what Morgan did with the class was they looked over a bunch of the mentor texts and they pulled out these different components. They pulled out the facts, the strong voice, the story, and the opinion. And we talked about what is each piece of this, like why does each piece of this matter, why is it here? So a story about potentially, one example she gives is a story she used was about soda in schools. And so you talk about what is the part of this was the story about the girl who is drinking the equivalent of 40 teaspoons of sugar every single day. And so talk about why would the author include that? What part of the article is that? And after that, she sent them off into small groups to analyze a feature article of their choice, and again, try to really pull out each of these different elements that within the article, and then they came back together in a class and they made a chart for each of the different articles. Where did they find the facts? Where did they find the opinion pieces? Where did they find the strong voice? And they started to draw trends. They started to see that in certain articles, usually authors weren't leading with their opinion, for example. Usually they would lead with some sort of story to really hook the reader. And so they really gained deeply into the structure, and also the different kinds of structure you can use in a feature article. After that, what she did was she had students independently color code articles, go back to the articles they had been using in groups, and color code them again by these different elements to make sure that they could really get a good facility with where are the facts, where's the story, what are the different pieces of the feature article. And so that was an entire mini lesson. Once they had really worked on and mastered this idea of the structure of it, she needed to help them choose a topic. And so instead of just sort of a standard choose a topic and go kind of idea, what she did was she really helped students go through a brainstorming exercise. She modeled this and then had them do it, where what they would do is they would list the topic that they were interested in, and then they would list all the information that they had about it, just sort of a free write about everything they knew or thought about the topic. And what they found was that, actually many of the students found that the topic they thought they were interested in, they didn't actually have much to say about, so it was more of a superficial interest. And she said in her class of 20 some odd students, actually 10 of them after this exercise went ahead and switched the topics that they wanted to do, because it's really important for this kind of a project that they have something that they're both really interested in, but also something they know enough about that they can really kind of dig in. So using that kind of a very structured brainstorming technique can be a good way to help students choose a topic that they're going to want to really run with. The third mini lesson was on utilizing facts. And in this, they went back to the anchor text, which is really where a lot of this came from. And they looked at, like, what were the authors doing? When the authors were having quotes from interviewees, who had they interviewed and why? And which quotes did they choose? And are there quotes they might not have chosen? And what do you think they would have done if none of the interviewers had given them a strong enough opinion that they wanted to include? They talked about things like the use of facts. When might an author want to say that 40% of people agree with this, and when might they use the phrase almost half? When is 87% versus almost all? So they talked about that. They talked about specific descriptive word choice. When are you using words like, this was a curious, this looked very curious, this looked very strange, versus when are you using a more neutral term like, this looked interesting, or they wondered about this. And so really diving into the use of facts, how authors use them, how authors put them in, how they sort of really twist and really hone the words that they're using and the phrases that they're using to get their point across. The last of the key mini lessons that Morgan talks about is the idea of selecting a title, which, while it might not seem like a super important thing, is actually something that she points out is often not talked about at all. And so what she did was she differentiated into two different types of titles. She said there's the straightforward title, and then there's the kind of wink at you title, which are kind of the clever ones. And in order to get students out of this habit of the first title I choose is the best one, she required that each of her students come up with 5 of the straightforward kind and 5 of the kind of wink at you clever kind, and then they chose them from that. And she said they actually came up with some very, very clever ones. She gave an example of one boy did Oh My Darling for an article about clementines and why more people should eat them. She gives another example of a student who puts like a question in the title, like why should I, which was an article about like forest preservation. And so really students did again get to understand this idea of like titling things matter. It's about putting your opinion into these feature articles. So again, to recap, there's a lot here, but these are some very practical strategies for getting this feature article unit up and running with sort of a writer's workshop mini lesson format. And again, she got really good results with her students, with the idea being that they really started to dig into this idea of what does it mean to be an author of nonfiction text in a way that they might not be able to get by just doing a straight up research report. So that's all for today. Happy teaching, and we'll talk to you soon.